David was still adjusting to life on the space station. He had only been there for a few weeks, and everything was still new. The station was a huge, bustling place, filled with different species from all over the galaxy. Humans, like him, were still in the minority. As a junior officer, his work was mostly about research and helping with the station's maintenance. He was getting used to the alien tech and different languages. But sometimes, it still felt overwhelming. One thing that David had quickly noticed was the janitorial staff. They were not human. The cleaning crew was made up of a variety of aliens, and most of them worked quietly and efficiently. But there was one in particular who caught David's attention. Her name was Yara, a tall, slender alien with pale blue skin, for arms and long silver hair. She was always cleaning around his area, moving with a calm grace that almost seemed unnatural. David didn't mind having her around. She was quiet and kept to herself, doing her job without causing any trouble. But one thing about Yara puzzled him. Whenever she was cleaning, she would often bend over right in front of him. At first, David thought it was just a coincidence. Maybe she was just focused on her work. But then it happened again and again. Every time she bent down to pick something up or clean, she would do it right in front of him, almost as if she was trying to get his attention. David wasn't sure how to feel about it. It wasn't like she was doing anything inappropriate, but it was definitely strange. He had never seen anything like it before. As a human, he wasn't used to this kind of behavior, especially in a professional setting. Most of the aliens on the station kept to their own customs, and David had learned to respect that. But this felt different. At first, he thought. Maybe it was just some strange habit of hers. Maybe it was part of her culture or her way of cleaning. But as the days went on, David began to notice more. Yara didn't just bend over once or twice, it was constant. Whenever she was around, she seemed to bend over in front of him without fail. David didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable, so he decided to keep quiet about it. Maybe it was just something she did without thinking. But still, he couldn't help but wonder, was this something normal for her species? Was it a custom, or was it something he had misunderstood? Blue skin seemed to glow under the station's lights. "Hey Yara," David said, a little unsure of how to begin. "Can I ask you something?" Yara turned around and gave him a soft smile. "Of course, David, what's on your mind?" David hesitated for a moment, feeling awkward, but he decided to just ask. "I've noticed something, and I was wondering if it's, part of your culture or something." Yara raised an eyebrow, looking curious. "What do you mean?" "Well," David started, feeling a little embarrassed. "I've noticed that, well, whenever you're cleaning, you seem to bend over a lot, and it's always in front of me. I was just wondering if it's some kind of custom or if I'm missing something." Yara looked at him for a moment, and for a brief second, David thought he might have crossed a line. But then she let out a soft laugh, and it made David relax. "Oh, I see," Yara said with a bright smile. "It's not a problem, David, it's just customary for my people." David blinked. "Customary," he repeated, confused. "Yes," Yara explained, still smiling. "Where I come from, bending over in front of someone is a sign of respect. It's a way of honoring their presence and showing them that we acknowledge their importance. It's not meant to be awkward at all." David's eyes widened in surprise. He hadn't expected that explanation. "So, it's not like an accident?" "No," Yara said with a chuckle. "Not at all. It's just how we do things. We believe in showing respect in every action, even the small ones. So, when I bend over in front of you, it's because I'm acknowledging your presence and your value." David felt a little embarrassed now. He had completely misunderstood the situation. "Oh, I didn't know that. I thought it was just, what?" I didn't know what to think. Yara smiled again, understanding. "It's okay. I can see how it might seem strange at first, but I assure you, it's just part of who I am. It's a way of connecting, even in the simplest of actions." David nodded, feeling a mix of relief and embarrassment. "I get it now. Thanks for explaining." Yara gave him a friendly wink. "No problem, David. If you ever have any other questions, just ask." As David walked back to his room, he couldn't stop thinking about what Yara had said. It wasn't a gesture of awkwardness or disrespect. It was a cultural practice, a way to show honor, and for the first time, David felt a little more connected to this strange, vast universe. David couldn't stop thinking about Yara's explanation. What had seemed strange at first now made sense. The way she bent over in front of him wasn't an accident, nor was it some awkward mistake. It was a custom part of her culture. She had explained it calmly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. But for David, this was new. He had never experienced anything like it before. Over the next few days, David found himself watching Yara more closely. He couldn't help it. She had caught his attention, and he wanted to understand her better. Every time she bent over to pick something up, he remembered her words. "It's customary in my culture." And with that new understanding, he began to look at her actions with a different perspective. The next time they crossed paths in the hallway, David decided to take a step further. He had more questions, and now that he understood the basics of the custom, he felt comfortable asking. Yara was cleaning the windows in the observation lounge, her silver hair flowing like a curtain in the low light. The movement of her arms, and the way she held herself was graceful, almost like she was dancing while working. "Hey Yara," David said as he approached, his voice a little hesitant. He didn't want to seem too curious, but his interest was genuine. Yara turned and smiled at him, her expression warm and friendly. "Hello David, how are you today?" "I'm good, thanks," David replied, trying to seem casual. "I've been thinking about what you said the other day, about your custom, and I was wondering if you could tell me more. Like, where did it come from? Why does it mean respect?" Yara paused for a moment, her eyes thoughtful as she put down her cleaning cloth. She seemed to appreciate that David was asking. "I'm happy to explain, David. It's important to me that you understand. Our culture has a long history, and customs like this go back many generations." David nodded, eager to listen. "I'd really like to know." Yara began speaking slowly, choosing her words carefully. "Long ago, my people were not as advanced as we are now. We didn't have the technology or the power that we do today. Back then, when we met someone new, we had to show that we respected them and their position in our lives. The way we showed this respect was through physical gestures. One of those gestures was bending down. It wasn't just for any occasion. It was done when we met someone important, when we wanted to show them that they held value." David listened intently, trying to imagine what it must have been like for her people. It was so different from the way humans interacted. "So, bending over was a way to show honor?" he asked, making sure he understood. "Exactly," Yara said with a soft smile. "In my culture, we've advanced technologically. Our culture hasn't changed as much as you might think. We value tradition. There's something about the simplicity of it, the act itself, that connects us to our past. Even now, when we encounter others, it's still a way of showing that we respect them, not just as individuals, but as part of a larger history." David could see the pride in her eyes as she spoke. It wasn't just a custom, it was a part of who she was. It was tied to her identity and the way she viewed the world. "I guess I never thought about it like that," David said, feeling a new sense of understanding. "I always thought respect had to be more formal, like a handshake or a bow. But this this feels different." "It is different," Yara agreed. "But that's what makes it meaningful. It's simple, honest, and it shows that we don't need grand gestures to show respect. Sometimes the most important gestures are the ones that are quiet and subtle." David couldn't help but admire Yara's perspective. She saw the world in a way that he never had. To her, respect wasn't about showing off or performing for others. It was about connection. It was about humility and honoring the person you were with, no matter how small the gesture might seem. "I'm glad you asked about it," David. Yara continued. "It's not easy to explain our customs to someone from another culture. But I appreciate that you want to understand." David smiled. "I do. I really do. Thanks for being so patient with me." Yara nodded, her smile warm and genuine. "It's no trouble. I know it takes time to adjust. We all have our own ways of doing things, but in the end we're all just trying to make sense of this big universe." David stood there for a moment, reflecting on everything Yara had said. He had learned so much more than he expected that day. The simple act of bending over something that had puzzled him for so long was no longer a source of confusion. It was a sign of respect, a quiet, humble way of honoring another person. And now, David could see it for what it truly was. A beautiful, meaningful custom. As Yara picked up her cleaning tools and began to move on to the next task, David felt a sense of peace. He no longer felt awkward or unsure around her. The next time she bent over in front of him, he would understand the gesture, and that made all the difference. Over the next few days, David found himself thinking more and more about Yara. What started as confusion over an odd custom had slowly turned into a genuine curiosity about her life and her culture. He had always respected the differences between the various species on the station, but something about Yara made him want to know more. She was kind, patient, and always willing to explain her ways, no matter how strange they seemed at first. David had never really had the chance to talk to someone from another species in such a personal way. Sure, there were a few casual conversations with other aliens on the station, but none of them felt as real as the talks he had with Yara. She had a way of making him feel comfortable, like there were no judgments or misunderstandings. She didn't just talk about her culture, she shared stories of her home planet, her upbringing, and even the challenges she faced being so far from home. One afternoon, as David sat in the break room, his mind wandering, he decided to approach Yara again. He had noticed how different her perspective was and realized that there was so much more he wanted to learn. This time, however, he wasn't going to ask about customs or traditions. Instead, he was going to ask her about herself. That as he walked through the hallway, he spotted her in the distance, near the window, carefully wiping it down with a cloth. Her movements were so graceful that it almost looked like she was performing some kind of dance. David smiled to himself, appreciating the calm energy she always brought with her. "Hey Yara," David said. Walking over, Yara turned with a smile, her silver hair catching the light as it moved. "Hello David, you today?" "I'm doing well, thanks," he replied, taking a seat nearby. "I've been thinking. I know a lot about your customs now, but I don't know much about you, where you come from, your life, that kind of thing. Would you mind sharing?" Yara set the cleaning cloth down and leaned against the wall, considering his request. It was clear that she hadn't expected to be asked such a personal question, but after a moment of thought, she smiled softly. "Of course, David, I don't mind sharing. It's not every day I get asked to talk about home." David's curiosity sparked. "I'd really like to hear about it." Yara took a deep breath, her gaze softening as she spoke. "I come from a planet called Zora 7. It's a beautiful place, filled with wide forests, sparkling lakes, and tall mountains that reach the clouds. But what makes Zora 7 special isn't just the beauty, it's the culture of harmony and balance we've built over thousands of years. We live in sync with the land and the animals. Every part of our world is connected, and we work hard to make sure nothing gets taken for granted." David listened carefully, imagining the world she was describing. He had never heard of Zora 7 before, but the way she spoke about it made him want to visit. Sounds like a peaceful oasis for any species. He was beginning to see how the customs Yara practiced, like the act of bending over in front of others, weren't just about respect. They were part of a much deeper cultural understanding. They were born from years of hardship, a way to remind her people of what really mattered. "What made you leave Zora 7? David asked, feeling a bit bolder now that the conversation was flowing. Yara seemed to pause, her expression shifting slightly, as if she was carefully considering her response. "I didn't leave by choice. At first, my people are explorers by nature. We believe in learning from others, connecting with different species. We send representatives out to study, share our knowledge, and learn in return. I volunteered for this mission. My family was proud of me, but it wasn't easy to leave home. It still isn't." David could hear the emotion in her voice. Leaving one's home planet to live among strangers must have been hard. He could relate to that feeling, even if it wasn't the same. He had left his family behind to serve on the station, far from Earth, but he knew that his reasons were different from hers. "Do you ever get homesick?" David asked quietly. Yara nodded, her eyes soft. "Sometimes, but I know that my purpose here is important. I'm learning, I'm growing. And even though I miss my family, I'm proud to be here. It's not always easy, but it's worth it." David smiled at her, admiring her strength. Yara wasn't just a janitor or a cleaner, she was a representative of her people, a bridge between worlds. Her role, though humble, carried a lot of meaning. She didn't just clean floors, she was part of something much larger, something that required courage and commitment. "I think you're pretty amazing, Yara," David said with sincerity. Yara chuckled softly, her eyes twinkling. "Thank you, David. You're not so bad yourself." They both shared a moment of quiet understanding. The differences between their worlds didn't matter as much anymore. They were both far from home, but in each other, they had found a way to connect. The bond they shared wasn't based on similarities, it was based on respect, curiosity, and the willingness to understand. Thus David left to finish his work. He felt lighter. The awkwardness he had once felt about Yara's customs was gone. Now he understood that they were just part of who she was, and that made her even more fascinating. Their journey of understanding was just beginning, and David was eager to see where it would take them. The days on the station passed quietly. David and Yara continued their friendly conversations, learning more about each other's cultures, beliefs, and life experiences. They shared laughs and stories, finding a deep respect for each other in their differences. Yara's calm nature and patient explanations made it easy for David to forget that she wasn't human. She had become more than just an alien janitor to him. She had become a friend. One morning, as David sat in his office, reading reports about the station's system upgrades, A loud alarm suddenly blared throughout the entire facility. It was followed by a deep, urgent voice over the loudspeakers. Attention, all personnel. This is an emergency. Unknown ships have entered the station's defense zone. All personnel are to report to their designated stations immediately. David froze for a moment, the weight of the announcement sinking in. Unknown ships. What did that mean? Who were they? The questions ran through his mind, but he didn't have time to dwell on them. He quickly stood up and headed for the door, his heart racing. He had to get to his station, to help in any way he could, as he made his way down the hallway. He noticed a few other crew members rushing toward the command center, their faces grim and focused. The station was built to withstand threats, but it was still unsettling to think about the unknown danger that might be headed their way. When he reached the command center, he found Yara there too. She wasn't in her usual janitorial uniform. Instead, she wore the standard blue jumpsuit of the station's emergency response team. Her eyes were calm, but there was a determined look on her face. She had clearly been called to action. Yara, David asked, surprised to see her there. Yara turned to him and smiled briefly, her expression serious. David, we have to prepare. The station is under threat. The emergency team needs all hands on deck. David nodded, his earlier confusion fading as adrenaline began to take over. He wasn't sure what was going on, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to sit idly by while the station was in danger. He needed to help. As the crew gathered, the situation was explained. The enemy ships had appeared out of nowhere, and their intentions were unclear. Communications were jammed, and it seemed they were not responding to any attempts to communicate. The station's defense systems had been activated, but there was no worry in the back of his mind. What if something went wrong? What if the situation was worse than they realized? Without thinking, David grabbed his communicator and called Yara. Yara, do you copy? There was a brief pause before he heard her calm voice. I copy, David. Everything is fine down here. The backup systems are running smoothly, just keeping an eye on everything. David let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Good. Just be careful, okay? We don't know what these ships are capable of. I will, she said. You take care up there. I'm counting on you. He smiled despite himself, feeling a strange sense of reassurance in her words. She had always been calm, but hearing her say that made him feel like they were in this together. They were a team now. Hours passed, and the station remained on high alert. The ships continued to orbit, silent and unmoving. Then, suddenly, the tension broke. The alarms sounded again, but this time, it was different. The enemy ships were moving. They were coming in fast. David's heart raced as the crew sprang into action. The station's defense systems fired up, and the battle for survival began. David worked with his team, keeping the systems running smoothly, coordinating their efforts with precision. It was intense, but he knew what he had to do. Meanwhile, down in the lower decks, Yara continued to monitor the backup systems. She knew how critical her work was. If the power systems failed, everything on the station would be in danger. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. As the battle raged above, Yara remained focused, her mind sharp, her movements quick. David's thoughts kept drifting back to her. She was a janitor, yes, but she had proven time and again that she was more than that. She was someone who could handle a crisis, someone who had the strength and the GA to face danger head-on, and David couldn't help but admire her even more for it. The battle was far from over, but in that moment, David knew one thing for sure: no matter what happened next, they were in this together, and that made all the difference. The battle had raged on for hours. David's heart was pounding as he worked with his team, adjusting the station's defense systems. The sounds of alarms and sirens filled the air, and the whole station seemed to tremble with the intensity of the attack. The unknown enemy ships were relentless, and the station was under constant threat. David focused on his task, trying not to let the stress of the situation overwhelm him. He knew the station's survival depended on keeping the systems running smoothly. His team worked efficiently, their movements synchronized, as they made adjustments to the power grid, repaired communication lines, and monitored the defense systems. But amidst the chaos, David's thoughts kept drifting back to Yara. He couldn't help but wonder if she was okay. She had gone down to the lower decks to work on the backup systems, and although he trusted her abilities, the danger of the situation made him uneasy. Every second felt like a lifetime. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, a message came through the station's communication system. The enemy ships were retreating. The station's defenses had successfully driven them back, but there was no time to celebrate yet. The threat was far from over. The crew needed to remain on high alert until they were certain the danger had passed. David let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He quickly checked in with his team to make sure everything was functioning. The power systems were stable, the communication lines were back online, and the defense systems were holding up. It had been a close call, but they had made it through. As the immediate danger passed, David's mind turned once again to Yara. He needed to find her and make sure she was safe. He quickly left the command center and made his way to the lower decks. The halls of the station were quiet now, the alarms finally silenced, but the tension still hung in the air. When David reached the lower decks, he found Yara standing near the power core, her face focused and determined as she made her final checks. She didn't even look up when he approached, so absorbed in her work. Yara, David called softly. She looked up at him, her expression calm but tired. David, she said with a small smile. Everything is fine. The backup systems are stable. We're safe. David let out a relieved sigh. He had been worried about her, but it was clear now that she had handled everything like the professional she was. I'm glad you're okay, he said, his voice sincere. Yara nodded, but her smile faded slightly. We're not out of danger yet. The systems are holding, but we need to stay on high alert. There could be more attacks. David glanced around the room. The backup systems were running smoothly, and everything seemed under control. But Yara's words reminded him that this wasn't over. The station had survived the first wave, but there was no telling what would come next. I know, David said, his mind racing, but we made it through the worst of it. That's something to be proud of. Yara didn't reply immediately. She simply nodded, her eyes thoughtful as she looked at the power systems she had worked on. It's easy to forget how much we depend on things like this, she said quietly. One mistake, one failure, and everything could have fallen apart, but we pulled through. David watched her closely, seeing the weight of the situation in her eyes. Despite her calm demeanor, he could tell that the crisis had taken a toll on her. They had both been through a lot, and while the station had survived, the emotional impact of the battle was still fresh. I couldn't have done it without you, David said, his voice soft but filled with gratitude. You really came through when it mattered most. Yara gave him a small smile, her tired eyes meeting his. We did it together. That's what matters. David felt a warmth spread through him. He had always known Yara was more than just a janitor, but now, in this moment, he realized just how much she had contributed. She had saved the station in her own way, keeping the backup systems running, ensuring that they had the power to fight back. Without her, they might not have made it. Thank you, Yara, David said quietly. She nodded, looking back at the power systems. You're welcome, David, but now it's time to rest. We'll need our strength for whatever comes next. David agreed. It was clear that the battle wasn't over, but for now, they had won. The station had held strong, and they had survived the worst of it. But as Yara had pointed out, they couldn't let their guard down. There would be more challenges ahead, more dangers to face. That as he stood there, looking at Yara, David realized that he had learned so much from her during this crisis. She had taught him what true strength meant, not just physical strength, but emotional strength, too. It wasn't about being fearless, it was about doing what needed to be done, even when you were afraid. It was about staying calm, staying focused, and trusting that you could make a difference. He felt a deep respect for her now. Not just for her bravery during the attack, but for the quiet strength she carried with her every day. She wasn't just a janitor. She was a protector, a warrior in her own way. And David was proud to call her a friend. As the two of them walked down the quiet hallway, ready to rest for the night, David knew that this experience had changed him. It had taught him more about courage, about friendship, and about the value of every individual, no matter their role. And he was grateful for Yara. She had shown him that sometimes the greatest heroes came from the most unexpected places. The calm after the storm didn't last long. Though the station had survived the attack, there were still repairs to be made and systems to monitor. The crew worked tirelessly, fixing damaged equipment, recalibrating defense systems, and reviewing security protocols to ensure they were ready for any future threats. But even in the midst of all the busy work, David couldn't shake the feeling of gratitude and respect he had for Yara. As days passed, the two of them continued their usual routine. Yara returned to her janitorial duties, but now David saw her with new eyes. She wasn't just cleaning the station's floors and windows, she was maintaining the foundation of their safety. Her work was crucial, even if others didn't fully understand its importance. One evening, after a long day of work, David found himself standing near the observation deck, looking out into the vast expanse of space. He had always enjoyed the view from the station. It was peaceful and humbling, with the stars twinkling in the distance like tiny diamonds. But tonight, it felt different. He couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened in the past few days. The attack, the danger, and most of all, Yara's role in it all. David had been reflecting on their conversations about her culture, her life on Zora 7, and the strength she had shown during the crisis. He realized how little he truly understood about her people, about their values and their way of life. He felt a deep desire to learn more, to truly understand the things that made her who she was. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned to see Yara walking toward him, her usual calm demeanor still in place. But tonight, there was something different about her. There was a slight weariness in her eyes, a quiet reflection that matched David's own mood. "Yara," David said, smiling, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened." Yara nodded, her gaze softening as she joined him at the railing. "I know it was a lot to take in, but we did what we had to do. The station is safe, and that's what matters." David looked at her, feeling a deep sense of appreciation. "You know, I don't think I really understood your culture before. All this, your customs, the way you approach life. It's not just about respect, it's about strength, a quiet strength, but powerful all the same." Yara turned her head to look at him, her expression thoughtful. "You're right," she said softly. "Strength isn't always about fighting or showing power. Sometimes, the strongest people are the ones who stay calm in the face of danger, who act with purpose and compassion, even when no one is watching. My people learned that the hard way. It's not something we take for granted anymore." David nodded slowly, taking in her words. He had always admired strength, but he had never thought about it in this way before. Yara's culture had taught her people that strength came from within, from their ability to maintain balance and peace, even in the most difficult situations. "I guess I've learned a lot from you, Yara," David admitted. "I've always been the kind of person who tries to fix things with my hands, you know. But you've taught me that sometimes the best thing we can do is just stay steady, be patient, and trust that things will work out." Yara smiled gently, her eyes meeting his. "I think we've both learned from each other. You've taught me that it's okay to ask for help, to trust others when things get tough. I've spent so much of my life focusing on doing everything on my own, but you've shown me that we're stronger together." David felt a warmth in his chest at her words. It was true, he had always thought of himself as someone who could handle things alone, but the truth was, he had never truly been alone. The people he worked with, the crew of the station, and Yara, they were all part of a bigger picture. They were all connected, working together to ensure the survival of the station and the safety of everyone aboard. "You know," David said thoughtfully, "I think the hardest part of this whole situation was realizing that I couldn't do it all by myself. I always thought I could, but I'm starting to see that strength isn't just about doing things alone. It's about being part of something bigger." Yara nodded. "Exactly, and sometimes, we don't even realize the impact we have on others. Your work on the defense systems, your calm in the face of danger, those things mattered. They mattered, to all of us." David looked out at the stars again, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. The station was safe for now, and the immediate danger had passed. But he knew there would always be more challenges to face. The galaxy was vast, and there were countless unknowns out there, but no matter what came next, he now understood that he didn't have to face it alone. He had Yara, and in her, he had found more than just a teammate. He had found a friend, a teacher, and a reminder that strength came in many forms. Sometimes, it was quiet and humble, like the way she bent over to show respect, or the way she stayed calm in the face of danger. And sometimes, it was in the quiet moments of reflection, like the one they were sharing now, as they stood side by side. Looking out into the endless stars, David realized that this was just the beginning. There would be more adventures, more struggles, and more victories. But whatever the future held, he knew one thing for sure: they would face it together. Days passed, and life on the station slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. The crew worked together to repair any remaining damage from the attack, but there was an unspoken bond that had formed between them all. They had survived, and that shared experience had brought them closer together. David, in particular, felt a new sense of connection to his colleagues and to Yara. He had learned so much from her in the past few weeks. More than just about her culture, more than just about her people's customs. He had learned about the quiet strength that existed within her. She wasn't just a janitor, and she wasn't just a survivor of a dangerous situation. Yara had shown him that true strength wasn't always about being the loudest or the most visible. Sometimes, it was about staying calm in the face of fear, doing what needed to be done without seeking attention or praise. One evening, David found himself sitting in the break room, sipping a cup of coffee. The station was peaceful now, with no alarms blaring, no enemy ships threatening to attack. He had just finished his shift, and Yara had finished hers. She sat across from him, cleaning up her tools as usual, but there was something different about the way she looked at him today. "You've been quiet lately," Yara said with a small smile. "Is everything okay?" David hesitated for a moment, looking down at his cup before meeting her gaze. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened, about how much things have changed, about how much I've changed. You know, I came here just to do my job, to focus on the work. I never really thought about the people around me." Yara's eyes softened as she listened, her silver hair catching the light from the overhead lamps. "I understand," she said gently. "We all have our reasons for being here, but sometimes, it's the people we meet along the way who change our path. You've taught me that." David raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Me? I don't think I've done anything special." Yara shook her head, her smile still in place. "You might not realize it, but you've shown me something important. You showed me that it's okay to ask for help, that we don't always have to do everything on our own. I used to think I could handle everything by myself, but you taught me that strength comes from trusting others, from working together." David felt a warmth spread through him at her words. He hadn't realized that his actions, his willingness to ask for help, had made such an impact on Yara. "I guess I never really thought about it that way. I always thought that being strong meant doing everything myself, you know. But after everything that's happened, I see now that maybe I've been wrong." Yara smiled again, her eyes bright with understanding. "Strength isn't about being alone, it's about knowing when to stand together. And you've shown me that." David sat back, taking in her words. He hadn't expected to hear this from Yara. She was someone who had always seemed so self-assured, so composed. But now, he understood that even she had her doubts, her struggles. They were more alike than he had realized. For a long time, David had thought that strength meant pushing through no matter the cost. He had always tried to be strong on his own, to keep his emotions in check, to avoid relying on anyone else. But after working alongside Yara, he had learned that strength wasn't about keeping everything inside. It was about recognizing when you needed help and when you needed to offer it. "I think you're right," David said slowly, his voice thoughtful. "Maybe I've been too focused on doing things alone. But now I see that I don't have to do everything by myself. I have the people around me, and that makes all the difference." Yara nodded, her smile growing a little wider. "That's the first step, David. The next step is to keep learning from each other. We all have our strengths, our weaknesses, and our stories. It's how we share them that makes us stronger." David smiled back, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. He had always prided himself on being self-reliant, but now he realized that there was nothing wrong with needing others, and in that realization, he had found a new understanding of what it meant to be strong. "Thank you, Yara," David said quietly, his voice filled with sincerity. "You've taught me so much, more than I ever expected." Yara's expression softened, and she reached out to touch his arm in a gesture of support. "It's nothing, David. We all help each other in our own way. That's what makes us stronger, together." For a moment, they both sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The sound of the station's quiet hum filled the room, a reminder that they were all part of something bigger, a sense of connection that, no matter how distant they were from their homes, made them feel like they belonged. David looked out the window, the stars shining brightly against the vast emptiness of space. It was a beautiful sight, one that made him feel small and insignificant in the grand scheme of the universe. But it also made him feel grateful for the people around him, for Yara, and for the bond they had formed in the midst of all the chaos. "I think we'll be okay," David said after a long pause, his voice calm and steady. "As long as we keep learning from each other, we'll be okay." Yara smiled, her eyes reflecting the same sense of peace. "We will, David, we will." As the two of them stood and left the break room together, the quiet bond between them seemed stronger than ever. They had come from different worlds, from different cultures, but they had found common ground. They had found strength in each other. And in that moment, David knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together.